Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going down a rabbit hole. It's fascinating and maybe a little unsettling, but that's what we do here.
Right into the deep end.
Yeah, we're diving into the world of scams and con artists, and we've got a really interesting stack of sources for this one. We've got some historical accounts of famous cons, we've got stories about real-life disasters. These disasters reveal a lot about how our minds can kind of play tricks on us, and we've even got some pretty cutting-edge psychology research.
This is a good one.
Yeah, so we're going to see how con artists actually exploit our thinking, and more importantly, how understanding their tactics can help us all make smarter decisions in life. Because let's be honest, who hasn't fallen for a tempting offer? Or, a too good to be true story.
I know I am.
At some point, right?
Yeah, we're all susceptible to these psychological traps. And what's fascinating to me is that con artists are like master puppeteers. They're pulling at the strings of our cognitive biases. They understand how our minds work, often better than we do ourselves.
That's a scary thought, right? Like, take this concept of confirmation bias. Basically, it's this sneaky mental shortcut where we favor information that just confirms what we already believe, even if it's wrong. Think about a time you researched a product you really wanted, like maybe a new phone or a car or something. Did you mostly seek out positive reviews, or did you spend an equal amount of time looking at the negative reviews, too?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's confirmation bias at work.
Exactly. And con artists are masters at exploiting this. They create these really compelling narratives that tap into our pre-existing beliefs,
Yeah.
making their scam seem all the more believable.
Okay, so let's look at a real-world example. This one's wild. It's called the Sir Francis Drake estate swindle. It was orchestrated by a guy named Oscar Hartzell. Now, this guy was a master storyteller. I mean, he spun this elaborate tale. It was about Drake's hidden fortune and a secret heir to the fortune. He played on people's fascination with buried treasures and royal conspiracies. And get this, he convinced over 70,000 people to invest in this non-existent fortune.
Wow, 70,000. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, this guy was good.
He even set up shop in London for 9 years, just to make it seem more legitimate. It's a classic example of how con artists create this illusion of credibility. They dress the part, they use fancy language, they surround themselves with all the symbols of authority.
It's like they're building a stage set for their grand performance, and we, the audience, are completely captivated.
Yeah, and here's the kicker. Even after Hartzell was exposed as a fraud, many of his victims refused to believe they'd been conned. They were so invested, both financially and emotionally, that they clung to the story, even when all of the evidence contradicted it.
That's mind-boggling. So it's not just about being gullible. It's about this deep-seated need to believe in the stories that we tell ourselves. But what about those times when we pour more and more time or money into something that's clearly a lost cause? Have you ever done that? I know I have.
Yeah, all the time. That's the sunk cost fallacy in action. It's our reluctance to abandon something that we've already invested in, even when it's clearly not working.
Okay, so how do con artists use this to their advantage?
They intentionally create losses to make the mark more likely to invest further. It's a manipulation of our natural aversion to loss.
So they're actually playing on our psychology, making us think, well, I've already come this far, I might as well keep going.
Precisely. And they often use another psychological trick. It's called the gambler's fallacy. It's the mistaken belief that past losses will somehow influence future outcomes.
Like if you flip a coin and get heads 5 times in a row, you might think tails is due next, even though the odds are still 50-50.
Exactly. Con artists might say things like, "You've been unlucky so far, but your luck is about to change." They prey on our desire to recoup our losses, making us more vulnerable to their schemes.
Wow, it's amazing how much psychology goes into these cons. It's like they've studied human behavior more than we have.
They have. And that's why it's so important to understand these tactics. Because it's not just about avoiding scams. It's about recognizing these patterns of behavior in all areas of life.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about confirmation bias and the sunk cost fallacy. But there's another psychological trap that I find particularly intriguing, and it has to do with our deep-seated need for social acceptance.
You're talking about reputational damage and the fear of being seen as gullible.
Right, like think about the Teton Dam disaster. Engineers had concerns about the dam's stability during construction, but the project just kept going. Why? Because so much had already been invested. Tragically, the dam failed, causing immense damage and loss of life.
It's a tragic story. And it's not just about engineering either. This is about human nature. Why are we so resistant to cutting our losses? Why do we double down? even when logic dictates otherwise. Well, it turns out there's a fascinating evolutionary explanation for this. Our primate ancestors relied on social groups for survival, and they engaged in grooming to build and maintain those bonds.
So basically picking bugs and dirt off each other to create feelings of well-being and bonding.
Exactly. And over time, humans evolved to use language for social bonding. We gossip, we share information, we build reputations. This allows us to form larger, more complex social groups than other primates. But here's the thing. Our reputation is incredibly valuable.
So when we fall for a scam, we're not just losing money, we're risking our social standing. Admitting we were fooled could make us seem gullible, even stupid, which could damage our relationships and opportunities.
And con artists understand this. They know that we're often more concerned with protecting our image than admitting we've been duped.
So they use this to their advantage, especially during the blow-off phase of a con, right?
Exactly. This is when they disappear, leaving the victim with a choice. Report the scam and risk reputational damage, or stay silent and protect their social image.
And as we saw with the Drake estate scam, many people choose silence. They cling to the belief that the con was real because admitting they were wrong would be too socially costly. It's a powerful illustration of how our evolutionary past continues to shape our behavior, even in the modern world.
We're wired to prioritize social acceptance. And con artists ruthlessly manipulate that instinct. And it's not just the fear of social judgment that keeps people silent. Sometimes it's the con artists themselves who actively work to silence their victim.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, they might use threats or intimidation to prevent the mark from reporting the scam. This is what's known as the fix.
So it's like a double whammy. You're already feeling foolish and vulnerable, and then you're faced with these potential consequences for speaking out. It's no wonder so many people just choose to stay quiet.
Exactly. And this brings us to another fascinating case, the story of Glaphyra Rosales and the art forgery ring. It's a mind-blowing example of how reputation and social dynamics can be manipulated, especially in a field like the art world.
Okay, so remind me, what happened with Glaphyra Rosales?
This woman managed to fool some of the most respected experts in the art world. For years, she was selling forged paintings, supposedly from a secret collection. And for a while, nobody suspected a thing.
Wait, how is that even possible? Don't these experts have ways to authenticate artwork?
They do. But Rosales was very clever. There were some red flags early on, like gaps in the provenance of the paintings and inconsistencies in the stories she was telling. But because she was dealing with such high-profile galleries and collectors, there was immense pressure to believe that the works were authentic.
I guess in that world, reputation is everything.
Absolutely. Think about it. If you're an art expert and you're presented with a painting, that could be a lost masterpiece. Your reputation is on the line. Declaring it a fake could be professionally devastating.
That makes sense. So Rosales exploited that pressure.
She did. She cultivated relationships with key players in the art world, creating this sense of trust and credibility. That made it even harder to question her. It's like she was weaving a social web alongside her artistic deception, making it almost impossible to see the truth.
And as she sold more and more paintings, the stakes must have just kept getting higher and higher.
Exactly. And this is where another psychological principle comes into play, the endowment effect. It's the idea that we tend to value things more, simply because we own them.
So these collectors, they've got these supposed masterpieces hanging in their homes, and they've spent a fortune on them. They're going to be very resistant to the idea that they're worthless fakes, even if the evidence is staring them in the face.
Exactly. And Rosales was a master at leveraging the sunk cost fallacy against her victims. In the art world, this means that once a gallery or a collector has invested millions in a painting, they're much less likely to admit it's a fake.
Wow, it's crazy how these psychological principles can be used against us. It's like a playbook for manipulation.
It is, in a way. And the art market itself, with its secrecy and anonymity, created the perfect environment for Rosales to operate in. She could claim she had this anonymous client with a secret collection, and nobody could really verify it. It was all built on trust and reputation, which, as we've seen, are easily manipulated.
Okay, so we've been diving deep into the dark side of human psychology. We've talked about how con artists exploit our biases, our fears, even our evolutionary instincts. But this begs the question, how can we protect ourselves? I mean, it feels like we're constantly walking this tightrope between being cautious and trusting the people around us.
That's the challenge. We don't want to become completely cynical and distrust everyone we meet, right?
Right.
But we do need to develop a healthy skepticism.
Right.
Especially when it comes to high-stakes decisions.
So it's about finding that balance between trust and critical thinking. But how do we do that in practice? What are some specific steps we can take?
One crucial strategy is to be aware of our own biases. We've talked about confirmation bias and the sunk cost fallacy. But there's another one that's particularly relevant here, the illusion of control.
Ah, the illusion of control. That's the one where we think we're calling the shots, even when it's all down to luck, right? Like when people think they can predict the stock market or win the lottery.
Exactly. And this can be especially dangerous in situations where we're under pressure or feeling vulnerable, which is exactly the kind of scenario con artists create.
So like when someone's dangling the promise of a huge financial reward, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement and believe that we're somehow in control of the outcome.
Precisely. And con artists often play on this. By creating a sense of urgency or exclusivity, they might say things like, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, or only a select few are being invited to participate.
It's all about creating that fear of missing out.
Yeah.
That feeling that if we don't act now, we'll regret it later. And that can totally cloud our judgment and make us more susceptible to their manipulation.
Right. So one way to counter this is to slow down the decision-making process. Don't let yourself be pressured into making a quick decision, especially when it comes to large sums of money or important life choices.
Take a step back. Examine the evidence critically. And if something feels off, trust your gut. Don't be afraid to ask questions, even if it makes you seem a little skeptical.
Yeah, absolutely. Another helpful strategy is to seek out independent advice. Talk to someone you trust, a friend, a family member, or a financial advisor, someone who's not emotionally invested in the situation and can offer an objective perspective.
Yeah, it's like getting a second pair of eyes on the situation, like a reality check to make sure we're not getting swept away by the con artist's charm.
Exactly. And if you do find yourself in a situation where you suspect you've been scammed, don't be afraid to report it. I know it can be embarrassing, but remember you're not alone. Con artists are professionals at deception, and falling for a scam doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human.
It does. And you know, it's important to remember that these scams are designed to exploit our psychology, and understanding how they work can help us make better decisions in all areas of life, not just when it comes to money.
Absolutely. I think the key takeaway here is that knowledge is power. The more we understand about our own cognitive biases and the tactics of con artists, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and the people we care about.
Absolutely. And remember, we're all vulnerable to these psychological traps. Con artists are incredibly skilled at what they do, and they've been honing their craft for centuries. You know, something I've been thinking about, though. We've talked a lot about how gossip and social information sharing can be exploited by con artists. But what if we could flip the script? What if we could harness those instincts for good?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Like, could we use social networks to share information about scams? Could we warn others about potential dangers?
I mean, it seems counterintuitive, using the very thing con artists exploit to protect ourselves. But it could be incredibly powerful.
Right. Or what about creating online communities dedicated to debunking cons and supporting victims of scams, a place where people can share their experiences and learn from each other and kind of build a collective defense against these schemes?
Yeah, I love that idea. Because if we can turn the tables on the con artists and use their own tactics against them, maybe we can create a world where scams are less prevalent and people feel more empowered to speak out. Instead of being isolated and ashamed, victims could become part of a movement to expose these schemes and protect others.
That's a great point. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope this has given you a new perspective on the psychology of scams and how to navigate the complexities of trust and deception in our world. Remember, knowledge is power, and by understanding how our minds work, we can make smarter choices and protect ourselves from those who seek to exploit us.
Until next time.